that is going to change the subject, that is also going to be and focusing stuff on the Supreme Court as a reason to reelect him. All the ducks seemed lined up in the row, and this is an opportunity. Here is a clip of Ralph Northam. He's the governor of Virginia, of course, talking about, we played the clip the other day from, there was a Virginia lawmaker. She was being questioned on the law that they are pushing, that it is legal this day to provide abortion services to a woman who is signed off by a doctor for medical reasons to receive an abortion as late as 40 weeks. Could be literally a day before labor begins, because if it is a threat to the mother's life, and if it is a threat to the mother's health, and it is a function of the viability of the child. And here is Northam, and it was fascinating. I barely saw this, but he does this interview, and this was spun by the right as saying that Northam says it's okay to kill children after to kill children who are born. And here is that interview, and then we'll talk more about it.
No exception. There was a very contentious committee hearing yesterday when Fairfax County Delegate Kathy Tran made her case for lifting restrictions on third trimester abortions, as well as other restrictions now in place. And she was pressed by a Republican delegate about whether her bill would permit an abortion even as a woman is essentially dilating, ready to give birth. And she answered that it would permit an abortion at that stage of labor. Do you support her measure, and explain her answer?
Yeah, and I wasn't there, Julie, and I certainly can't speak for Delegate Tran, but I would tell you, first thing I would say is this is why decisions such as this should be made by providers, physicians, and the mothers and fathers that are involved. There are, when we talk about third trimester abortions, these are done with the consent of obviously the mother, with the consent of the physicians, more than one physician, by the way. And it's done in cases where there may be severe deformities, there may be a fetus that's non-viable. So in this particular example, if a mother is in labor, I can tell you exactly what would happen. The infant would be delivered. The infant would be kept comfortable. The infant would be resuscitated if that's what the mother and the family desired. And then a discussion would ensue between the physicians and the mother. So I think this was really blown out of proportion. But again, we want the government not to be involved in these types of decisions. We want the decision to be made by the mothers and their providers. And this is why, Julie, that legislators, most of whom are men, by the way, shouldn't be telling a woman what she should and shouldn't be doing with her body.
And do you think multiple physicians should have to weigh in, as is currently required? She's trying to lift that requirement.
Well, I think it's always good to get a second opinion, and for at least two providers to be involved in that decision, because these decisions shouldn't be taken lightly. And so, I would certainly support more than one provider.
All right, let's go back to
now. Of course, in some instances, there aren't more than one provider, right? I mean, if you're living in a rural area, there aren't necessarily multiple doctors on call who are working in obstetricians, and so, but this is very reminiscent of the Terry Schiavo thing. Because when you're talking about these children, that if a child is born and the doctors know that this child has no internal organs, or, is missing internal organs, or has, can survive perhaps for 3 or 4 days in this instance, that's what we're talking about here in these instances. And this is very much like the Terry Schiavo situation, which I don't know if you guys remember.
You should refresh people.
Terry Schiavo was a woman who was in a vegetative state, and she had, before entering into that state, she had a conversation with her husband that he would pull the plug. Her parents did not want to, and the U.S. Senate was trying to get involved and into this decision. Because there were protesters out there, and it became this big political football, and it was very successful for the Republicans. It was a very successful.
Was it? No, it wasn't.
Ultimately, I think it was successful insofar as it was a way of rallying. They lost, but they lost this battle. But it was a way of rallying the evangelicals. Now,
what year did that happen,
but that was 2005. They lost the battle.
They
lost the
midterms
midterms very badly, and as well, if you look at polls from that period, the vast majority of Americans said, "What? No, the Senate should not be involved in this issue."
I agree, but I do think that it hardened their base. 2006 was not about Terry Schiavo.
It was for me.
It was not about Schiavo.
Terry Schiavo
and I think abortion.
She must die.
Yes.
Abortion, I think, has a different resonance than in that instance, right? As an adult, you had the husband there. He came out, and I just can't help but think that at the very least, Trump is going to try and make this that type of thing.
I think regardless of the direct comparison, whether we go with it one way or another, I mean, you're 100% right in terms of abortion is just the way of reaffirming, like you said earlier, the one thing that he has actually been, he's absolutely kept his word on, which is I'm going to fill the court with the most extreme retrograde people imaginable, and I'm going to take, an axe to everything. Obviously, regulation on the corporate sector first and foremost, but the whole evangelical agenda as well. And if that is put back into the center of their minds for his reelect, that bodes better for him. I still think he's in pretty tough shape no matter what.
Yeah, it goes back to that chart that you showed yesterday, right, Michael, about how most voters are either socially liberal or socially conservative, but definitely not economically conservative.
Right.
And people underestimate the degree to which Trump won on this vague economic populism that he injected into his rhetoric combined with social conservatism, and he could do it again.
I don't think he will, but I think that that's the best play. But I also don't ever take the Democrats could always snatch defeat from the jaws of victory.
So. We'll see. I think he's going to talk about abortion quite a bit.
And do you think he's been personally responsible for abortions?
Oh yeah.
I mean, if he's ever had sex.
I don't think he's a provider, if that's what you mean.
Yeah. It's like my dad and I got into the provider business, helped a lot of women.
Okay, I'm gonna be an annoying SJW now, as I am most of the time, and remind everyone that it's not only women who can get pregnant and need abortions. It's hard for me to remember too, but you gotta try.
Okay. Fair enough. I don't know Donald Trump's involvement in that there, but
he's provided abortions in every single scenario. He was that was his life's purpose. He was supposed to be an abortion provider, but he wanted to please his dad.
He'll talk about abortion a lot, sure, and but at this point, I just don't think anything moves the needle anymore.
No.
You're not convincing anyone, and these socially conservative voters, these the hardcore evangelical types, they're already 100% going to vote for him. That's it. There's not going to be any dissension in those ranks.
No, I mean I am still firmly in the Martin O'Malley can win camp, and I think it's a question though of how motivated these voters will be to come out. That it's not a question of convincing anybody; it's a question of turnout. It seems to me.
They're going to turn out because they always turn out. They turned out in the midterms, and they turned out big for Republicans.
Yep.
So they're going to turn out because that's what they do. That's a lot of them are just old people with nothing else to do, and it's of course that's always what it comes down to. At the end of the day, it's the judges. You want the judges. I gave you 2 judges, probably 3 by then.
Right. That's going to be super scary. Here is let's look at this clip of Elizabeth Warren. Who is going on Bloomberg and talking about her brand. And I'm curious.
I'm sorry. Do you remember Bloomberg's book title? Speaking of good book titles, it was really good. Any guesses?
The bloom is off the rose.
Let 1,000 flowers bloom.
Oh, God, no. It was Bloomberg on Bloomberg.
Oh.
It's really...
That's good.
That's him.
They rejected Bloomberg as that was the working title. Here's Elizabeth Warren talking about taxation on, I think this was on Bloomberg. And it's interesting. Well, let's play this clip first.
Capitalism without rules is theft. Encouraging companies to build their business models on cheating people, that's not capitalism. That's not competition in the marketplace. That's not producing consumer surplus. So what I believe is capitalism with serious rules. And that means rules where everybody gets a chance to play.
The surplus is the theft.
Well, all right. So let me just ask you. The Bernie Sanders, obviously running on, or at least his pedigree, right, is democratic socialism.
Yeah.
You know, hers is a reformation of capitalism. That said, she's suggested that the government sees the means of production when it comes to generic drugs. Her proposals, how much at the end of the day do you think their proposals land differently from each other, and how relevant is that difference?
I don't know, because she's been throwing up a lot of stuff in the past few weeks now, and I mean, the legislative proposals from Democratic senators have all been for show for the past few years now. That being said, you know, I'm excited by some of the things that she's proposed. For instance, opening up corporate boards and having labor representation on them, which would actually, I think, be a sea change in the way that American capitalism works. The thing about Warren is, in contrast to the other reformist candidates, she's the only one who seems actually reformist. She actually seems to believe what she says. She seems to actually position herself in opposition to the interests of capital, which is not something we've seen from any Democratic nominee for a long time now. So that being said, as far as the left goes, Warren is a perfectly acceptable candidate.
I guess it depends how much it matters to you, how much you think the rhetoric matters, right? Because there are people who would support Bernie over Warren, people on the socialist left, because Bernie is coming from a place of democratic socialism, structural reform, critique of capitalism, yada, yada. I think he's more of a social democrat than any kind of anti-capitalist, but whatever. Whereas Elizabeth Warren is coming from a place of reforming capitalism. So the outcomes might look relatively similar, but it just matters if you care that people are hearing those words, you know?
I'm very glad with what Warren's doing. And if he doesn't run, I'm happy to push my support over. But I think there are these subtle differences that do matter in terms of how you frame. I'm less worried about the words, but I'm like, to me, there is also just some unmovable facts here that, like, because she opted not to run in 2016, where maybe she could have very well actually defeated Hillary Clinton, which would have been incredible. But it's like Bernie did it, and Bernie has an entire. I mean,
all right. Well, I don't want to get. I want to stay on this.
Most...
I want to stay on this point, though. I don't want to get in. I just want to stay specifically on this point. You know, whether he deserves it or not.
I'm not talking about deserves. He's the most popular politician in America.
I don't. That's not what I'm talking about. I want to talk about, like, in terms of, at the end of the day, is she going to be able to even go further in terms of her reformation proposals than Bernie, because she is making it like it's reforming capitalism, as opposed to, rhetorically speaking, I want to replace the system.
Oh, capital does not care about that.
Right. I mean, I couldn't tell you. I have absolutely no idea what the next thing Liz Warren is going to say. I mean, that being said, is she going to, roll out? I propose the nationalization of every major industry,
right?
And it's just sort of something we all accept that she believes now.
Well, who would be the constituency that would speak? Because in terms of the base, they don't care, and in terms of the elites, they don't care.
If Bernie Sanders came out with, we should have the government make generic drugs,
right?
I feel like there would be people's hair would go on fire. I think from I think we're going to hear that from other candidates. I think we could hear that from a Kamala Harris, conceivably.
Conceivably, but I mean, at some point, they're all going to critique each other's proposals. But in terms of the voting public.